It's June 1940. The unthinkable has happened. Paris, the city of light, the heart of an empire, is occupied. Swastika banners hang from the Arc de Triomphe. The French government has collapsed, its armies shattered in just a few weeks. From the Atlantic coast to the Polish forests, a new order is being forged in iron and blood, and a single power casts its shadow over the continent. To the west, one defiant island nation stands alone, bracing for an invasion. To the east, Germany's supposed ally waits, nervously watching the border. The world is stunned by the speed and ferocity of the German victory, a victory built on a terrifying new kind of warfare, Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. For millions, it seems the war is already over and Europe is on the edge of a new dark age. But how did it come to this? How, in less than a year, did one nation bring an entire continent to its knees? And what desperate, bloody struggle would it take to win it back? This is that story. From the first shots fired to the final apocalyptic battle in the ruins of Berlin, this is the story of the war that consumed Europe. It didn't start in the rubble of France, but on a quiet border in the east 1 year earlier. On September 1st, 1939, using a faked Polish attack as a pretext, the German war machine is unleashed. More than 1.5 million men with thousands of tanks and aircraft pour across the frontier into Poland. This isn't a traditional war of front lines and slow advances. This is Blitzkrieg. German panzers don't just engage the Polish army, they punch right through it, driving deep into the country to encircle huge formations of troops. Overhead, the Luftwaffe bombs railways, communication lines, and cities, creating chaos and making it impossible for Poland to mount a coherent defense. Britain and France, who had a treaty to defend Poland, issue an ultimatum. When it expires on September 3rd, they declare war on Germany. But for Poland, it's already too late. As the Germans advance relentlessly from the west, the other shoe drops. On September 17th, the Soviet Union, citing a secret agreement with Germany, invades from the east. Caught in a monstrous vice, Poland is crushed. Within weeks, the fighting is over. Warsaw surrenders, and the country is carved up by its two powerful neighbors. Europe is at war, but after Poland falls, a strange quiet settles over the continent. That winter of 1939 and 1940 becomes known as the Phony War. Along the heavily fortified Maginot Line, French and German soldiers stare at each other, but few shots are fired. There's a sense of unreality in Western Europe, a lingering hope that a full-scale war can still be avoided. It was a fatal miscalculation. While the Allies waited, Germany was preparing. The illusion is shattered in April 1940. In a swift, brutal campaign, German forces invade Denmark and Norway. Denmark falls in a single day. Norway holds out for 2 months, but it too is conquered. The move secures Germany's northern flank and its crucial supply of iron ore from Sweden. But this was just the opening act. On May 10, 1940, the main event begins. The German army launches its great offensive in the west, Case Yellow. It strikes the neutral countries of Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands all at once. The Allies, believing Germany was just repeating its World War I strategy, rushed their best forces north into Belgium to meet the attack head-on. This was exactly what the German commanders hoped they would do. The real German attack didn't come through the plains of Belgium. It came through the dense, hilly Ardennes forest, a sector the French thought was impassable for a big mechanized army. Hundreds of tanks and thousands of soldiers poured through this impenetrable region, completely bypassing the Maginot Line and coming out behind the main Allied armies. The result was a disaster on a scale no one thought possible. German armored columns, led by generals like Heinz Guderian, raced for the English Channel, cutting the Allied forces in Belgium off from the rest of France. The British Expeditionary Force and huge parts of the French and Belgian armies were now pinned against the coast, with their backs to the sea at the port of Dunkirk. What happened next wasn't a battle, but a rescue. In a desperate improvised evacuation called Operation Dynamo, a flotilla of over 800 vessels, Everything from Royal Navy destroyers to civilian fishing boats and yachts sailed from Britain to pull the soldiers off the beaches. Under constant attack from the Luftwaffe, they managed to save over 338,000 Allied troops. It was a miracle that saved the core of Britain's army to fight another day. But while those men were saved, France was lost. With its best armies gone, the remaining French forces couldn't stop the German advance. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris. 8 days later, in the very same railway car where Germany had signed the armistice ending World War I, France surrendered. Hitler had his revenge. In just 6 weeks, the Wehrmacht had done what the Imperial German Army couldn't do in 4 years of war. With France gone, Great Britain stood alone, a final point of defiance against a German-dominated Europe. Hitler, thinking the war was basically won, offered peace terms. The new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, furiously rejected them. In response, Hitler ordered his generals to prepare Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. But before any invasion could happen, Germany had to achieve one thing: control of the skies. It had to destroy Britain's Royal Air Force. So began the Battle of Britain in July 1940, a massive air war fought over southern England. The Luftwaffe, confident after its quick victories, launched huge raids against airfields, factories, and cities, including the terrifying bombing of London known as the Blitz. Day after day, night after night, the bombs fell. But the RAF, though outnumbered, had superb Spitfire and Hurricane fighters and a revolutionary new radar system. It refused to break. As Churchill said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." By October, it was clear the Luftwaffe couldn't win. Hitler's first major defeat was tactical, but its strategic importance was huge. Operation Sea Lion was postponed forever. Britain would survive to become the unsinkable aircraft carrier for the liberation of Europe. Frustrated in the West, Hitler turned his eyes east. His ultimate goal had always been the destruction of the Soviet Union, to seize its vast lands for German colonization, what he called Lebensraum, or living space. The Non-Aggression Pact had been nothing more than a temporary convenience. On June 22, 1941, he launched the largest land invasion in human history, Operation Barbarossa. Over 3 million German and Axis soldiers, thousands of tanks and waves of aircraft stormed across the border, catching the Red Army and its leader, Joseph Stalin, completely by surprise. The initial German advances were stunning. Using blitzkrieg tactics on a massive scale, they encircled and destroyed entire Soviet armies. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were killed or captured. Army Group North drove toward Leningrad, Army Group Center aimed for Moscow, and Army Group South pushed into the resource-rich Ukraine. It looked like the Soviet Union would collapse just like France. But the Soviet Union wasn't France. The vast distances, the scorched earth policy of the retreating Soviets, and the sheer size of the Red Army started to take a toll. German supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Then the autumn rains turned the dirt roads into rivers of mud. And then came the real enemy, the Russian winter. By December 1941, German troops were on the outskirts of Moscow. Some officers claimed they could see the Kremlin spires through their binoculars, but the men were exhausted, frostbitten, and not equipped for the brutal cold. Right there, before the gates of the capital, the German offensive finally ground to a halt. Stalin, bringing in fresh divisions from Siberia, launched a huge counterattack. The Germans were thrown back, suffering a shocking defeat. Moscow was saved. The blitzkrieg had failed. The war in the East wasn't going to be short. It was going to be a savage, grinding war of attrition. 1942 marked a new phase of the war. In the East, Hitler shifted his focus south. He wanted to capture the Caucasian oil fields and cut off the vital Soviet supply route on the Volga River. The key to this plan was the city that bore Stalin's name, Stalingrad. The battle for Stalingrad, starting in August 1942, became the symbolic heart of the entire war. The German Sixth Army, one of the Wehrmacht's best, fought its way into the city. What followed was some of the most brutal fighting in history. The battle devolved into a nightmare of close-quarters combat for every street, every building, every single room. The city was reduced to a smoldering ruin, where a new soldier's life expectancy could be measured in mere hours. While the Germans poured more men into the meat grinder of the city, the Soviet High Command was preparing a trap. In November 1942, they launched Operation Uranus. Massive Soviet armies attacked the weak Romanian and Hungarian forces guarding the German flanks. Within days, they linked up, trapping the entire German Sixth Army, nearly 300,000 men. In a move of fatal arrogance, Hitler forbade them from breaking out, promising he could supply the army by air. The airlift was a complete failure. Trapped in the frozen wasteland, starving and out of ammunition, the Sixth Army was slowly destroyed. In February 1943, the last of them surrendered. Stalingrad was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological catastrophe for Germany and a massive victory for the Soviet Union. It marked the decisive turning point on the Eastern Front. From now on, the Red Army would be on the attack, beginning the long, bloody push back toward Germany. The tide was also turning elsewhere. In July 1943, after defeating German and Italian forces in North Africa, the Western Allies, now powered by the industrial might of the United States, invaded Sicily. The campaign led to the fall of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini and knocked Italy out of the war. Germany was forced to occupy its former ally, pulling precious divisions away from the Eastern Front. That same summer, the Germans tried one last major offensive in the east, a huge pincer attack around the city of Kursk. The result was the largest tank battle in history, a colossal clash of steel. But the Soviets knew the attack was coming and had prepared deep, elaborate defenses. The German offensive was smashed, and their armored forces were crippled. After Kursk, the German army in the east would never regain the upper hand. The ring was beginning to close. By the start of 1944, the German war machine was being relentlessly ground down. In the east, the Red Army launched a series of huge offensives that tore the German lines apart. In Italy, Allied forces were locked in a tough, slogging fight up the mountainous peninsula. And in the skies over Germany, Allied bombers were relentlessly pounding cities and factories. But for years, Stalin had been demanding that the Western Allies open a real second front in Northern Europe to take some of the pressure off his forces. At the Tehran Conference in late 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin finally agreed. The invasion would happen in the spring of 1944. The preparation, codenamed Operation Overlord, was the most complex military undertaking in history. Millions of Allied soldiers, sailors, and airmen gathered in southern England. A vast armada of nearly 7,000 ships was assembled. To fool the Germans, the Allies created an elaborate deception plan, Operation Bodyguard, to convince Hitler the main landings would be at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point in the Channel. The real target? Normandy. On the night of June 5, 1944, the invasion began. Over 24,000 Allied airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines to seize key bridges and roads. Then, at dawn on June 6th, D-Day, the main amphibious assault hit. Over 156,000 Allied soldiers stormed 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The resistance was ferocious, especially at Omaha Beach, where American forces took devastating casualties. But through sheer courage and overwhelming force, the Allies clawed their way ashore and secured a foothold. For the next 7 weeks, a brutal battle of attrition raged in the Normandy countryside, where the dense hedgerows gave the Germans perfect defensive cover. But in late July, American forces finally broke through with Operation Cobra, tearing a huge hole in the German lines. Allied armies poured through the gap, and the German 7th Army was encircled and virtually destroyed in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. Just 2 weeks after D-Day, the Soviets launched their own massive summer offensive, Operation Bagration. It was a stunningly powerful assault that completely shattered Germany's Army Group Center, wiping out dozens of divisions and driving the Germans out of Belarus and eastern Poland. For the Wehrmacht, it was a disaster on a scale even greater than Stalingrad. With German armies in France in full retreat, Allied forces swept across the country. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated. By September, most of France and Belgium were free, and the Allies were at the borders of Germany itself. As 1944 drew to a close, it seemed the war might be over by Christmas. But the Third Reich refused to die quietly. In a desperate final gamble, Hitler launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest in December, hitting a weak point in the American lines. The attack achieved total surprise, creating a large bulge in the Allied front. The Battle of the Bulge became the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States in the entire war. For weeks, in the bitter cold and snow, American forces fought back, most famously at the besieged town of Bastogne. Eventually, the German offensive ran out of fuel and steam. The gamble had failed, and Germany had wasted its last reserves. Now, the final act began. In early 1945, the Allies pushed into Germany from the west. In the east, the Red Army launched its final colossal offensive across Poland and into Germany proper. It became a race to Berlin, driven as much by post-war politics as military goals. The final battle for the German capital began on April 16, 1945, as 2.5 million Soviet soldiers assaulted the city. The defenders were a ragtag collection of exhausted army units, Hitler youth boys, and old men. The fight for Berlin was an apocalypse. Soviet artillery pounded the city to rubble in a street-by-street battle of unmatched ferocity. As the Red Army closed in on the city center, Adolf Hitler, hiding in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, finally faced reality. On April 30, 1945, he and his wife Eva Braun committed suicide. The battle raged for 2 more days. On May 2nd, the Berlin garrison surrendered. A few days later, on May 7th and again on May 8th, the German High Command signed the official unconditional surrender. After 5 years, 8 months, and 7 days, the war in Europe was over. We've only scratched the surface of these world-changing events, from the brilliant strategies at Stalingrad to the final desperate days in the Führer bunker. To make sure you don't miss our next chapter in history, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, they revealed a continent in ruins. Cities from London to Stalingrad were devastated. The economic and social fabric of Europe was torn apart. The human cost was staggering. Up to 40 million Europeans were dead, more than half of them civilians. Millions more were homeless refugees in a shattered world. The war redrew the map. It ended the era of European colonial empires and gave rise to 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their ideological conflict would define the next 50 years in the Cold War. It led to the division of Germany and the Iron Curtain that fell across the continent. The legacy of the battle for Europe is complicated. It's a testament to the depths of human cruelty epitomized by the systematic genocide of the Holocaust. But it's also a story of immense sacrifice and the incredible resolve of nations and individuals who fought to defeat tyranny. It was a war that laid a continent to waste, but also laid the foundation for a new Europe, one where the expression "never again" became a solemn guiding principle for the generations that followed.